to Truth and Liberty. Thank you for joining our daily live call-in broadcast where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to the issues, and you can call in and get your questions answered in real time. According to the Bible, it's the truth you know that sets you free. So call in today to get answers, information, and resources to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and the world. And now here's your host, Richard Harris.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show. It's great to have you watching today. It's going to be a really good program. We've got a special guest lined up today that is really going to encourage you, I believe, and inform you. And I'm excited about today's program. Before we get into that, though, I wanted to mention that the Truth and Liberty Conference is coming up. Can you believe we're already in late July here, folks? Truth and Liberty Conference is September 12th through the 14th, and you do not want to miss this year's event. It's going to be awesome. September 12th through the 14th, you can register now. It's going to be at the campus of Harris Bible College in Woodland Park, Colorado. A beautiful site, and as it always is. But our special guest speaker this year is going to be Dr. Ben Carson, so you won't want to miss that. But also, we're going to have Rick Green, founder of Patriot Academy, Bill Federer, one of our favorites around here, Marjorie Dannenfelser, Pastor Cheon of Harvest Fellowship in California, and also Torben Sondergaard, who is a Dutch evangelist who was arrested and detained in the United States of America for 18 months. Really and truly, the real reason was because of his religion. That's right, folks. So you won't want to miss. Of course, Andrew's going to be ministering in me, but register today at truthandliberty.net. Also, the Healing is Here conference is coming August 6th through the 9th, also at Karis. Register for that today. That is usually one of our most popular events here at the ministry, so get your seat today. All right, guys, my guest today is Jeremy Dys, who's an attorney for one of my favorite legal organizations in the world, and that's First Liberty Institute. And Jeremy is a great lawyer, and he's one of these guys who's out there fighting tooth and nail, dawn to dusk, making a real difference in turning America back to the founding principles of this nation. He's got a law degree from West Virginia University in 2005, served in a judicial clerkship, and then for 6 years before joining First Liberty, he had his own public policy organization where he was fighting for life, marriage, and religious freedom. First Liberty is founded by Kelly Shackelford, and they are constantly winning cases and putting the liberals back on their heels. Jeremy, you're a real star, brother. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, you know, Jeremy, religious freedom is, the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. It is the first liberty, hence the name, right? In the First Amendment, in the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights. Why did our founding fathers make religious freedom the number one freedom in the Bill of Rights?
Oh, that's the exception among our entire world history where, if there's any competitor to the absolute power by the autocrat, the king, the dictator, that had to be done away with so that the king, the dictator, whatever, could have all the power consolidated behind his own interests. Our founders wanted to diversify that power and recognize that all power is derived from not just the consent of the governed, but by recognizing the very rights that God has given to us. That's why our national philosophy expressed in the Declaration of Independence reminds us that we're all created equal, that we're endowed with certain inalienable rights, meaning they were not given to us by government. They can't be taken away by government. They were given to us by God. They're foundational to our Creator. And among those rights, and chief among those rights, are the very first rights that we find in our Bill of Rights, our religious freedom. And if those were removed from us or somehow redefined to be a gift from government, well, then they could be removed entirely. And we would only be permitted to practice the religion that our leaders tell us that we can practice. We would only be able to do it in the way that they say that we can do it. We'd only be allowed to worship and express our religion in the places in which we're told that we could do those. And in other words, we simply would not be free people. And so what the founders envisioned for us is what we should have today, a robust America that recognizes a plurality, perhaps, of religions that are out there, but that religion is central to our government, our American experience. That's why John Adams said so famously, our government is made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. That's pretty key, and we ought to consider how important that is.
I think you hit on something that's really critical. In the United States of America, our concept of freedom and liberty is based on our faith in God. In other words, what the Declaration says is that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. The leftists seem to want to remove that foundation from the concept of rights. And what happens when you take God out of the picture, Jeremy? Is there really an intellectual foundation left for rights, or is it just the whim of the government to say when and where you have rights and when you don't?
Well, there's much of this I'll leave to the theologians to discuss, but from a lawyer's perspective, if there's not a higher power on which to base our moral code, then it's all just a matter of contract law, what we can agree to with one another about behaving. And if your morality is better than my morality, well, why? Why is that? And why is it that I have to follow what your law says? I would much rather that we would base our society, as our founders intended for us to do, based upon a moral principle that there is a God who sits in the heavens and governs the universe. And if that is the case, then he has a way that he not only wishes to be worshiped, but wishes his people to behave. And so that foundation of moral law in this world is vitally important. And the way that we learn about that is through our religious experience. Therefore, we have to keep those experiences fully free so that we can adequately govern ourselves.
Well, yeah, I want to get into some more substantive stuff, but first, let's just take a minute. And can you share about what you do, what First Liberty does? What's the mission of your organization, and why do you exist?
Yeah, First Liberty is a nationwide religious liberty law firm. All we do is defend religious liberty for all Americans. Now, we do that in a variety of contexts. We want to make sure you have religious liberty when you go to school, whether you're a student or a teacher. We believe everyone at our school should be able to practice their faith, even in school assignments, class discussions, and things like that. We defend religious liberty within our public square so that when, for instance, men and women go to fight for our freedoms overseas and they sadly and tragically lose their lives, we remember them through such things as crosses on battlefields, the Stars of David in the public square. Those are good ways for us to remember the sacrifice that they have and are a key part of our history and tradition in this country. We defend religious liberty within our workplace, and that's becoming more and more critical. We've recently gained some significant victories in that area of the law as well, so that you don't have to sacrifice your religion if you're an employee, but that you can be a person of faith while you're at work. We also want to make sure that you have religious liberty in the military. In fact, you give up a lot when you go into our armed forces. Giving up your religion is not one of those things. You should be free to practice your faith even in our armed forces. And of course, and this is what I give specific attention to within our organization, I chair our practice group on religious institutions, houses of worship, and religious organizations. Those organizations that people of faith form together to do good works in this community. We want to make sure the doors of your church stay open. And the ministry arms that come from those churches, those hospitals and charities that we practice in every single day throughout this country are fully free to do the good work of the faith to which you are called. And so if you want to learn more about First Liberty, I would encourage you to go to firstliberty.org. One thing I didn't mention, I should mention, is that if you have to use our services, and I hope you never do, but if you do, we never charge for our services. We do all of our work pro bono for free. So I'd encourage folks to go to firstliberty.org and learn more.
Well, it's amazing that you guys are able to do as much as you are doing and do it so effectively without charging for what you do. So I have a sneaking suspicion that people could help you do that by donating. Is that true? Do you welcome donations from the public?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the only reason that our clients are able to receive the top-notch legal care that they receive is because people like you and others around the country have invested in this good work. I'll tell you a sort of a secret within the legal community, which is that if the free market could sustain a practice like this, there would be a cabin industry built up all around it. But there's not a good way for these clients to get paid in these types of cases, and it drains their resources quickly. I can't imagine, for instance, the pastor we represent in Ohio, who's fighting to stay out of jail. Yes, fighting to stay out of jail for the religious work he's doing there. He pays $1,000 a month in rent for his church. That would be gone in the span of about an hour for most of the attorneys that we work with if we had to send him a bill. And yet he's getting some of the most incredible legal coverage right now by lawyers, all for free. In my opinion, if the government violates your civil rights, you shouldn't have to pay an attorney to get them back. So it's really critically important. If you believe in the importance of religious liberty, go to firstliberty.org and partner with us financially so that we can provide those services and continue to do so for free around the country.
Jeremy, I was at a town hall type event last year, just to hear this progressive speaker who was attacking our organization as a Christian nationalist one and stuff. But they actually said that it's a lie that Christians are being discriminated against or being persecuted today. And I just want to ask your perspective on that. Is Christianity, even in America, coming under increasing attack?
It's hard to argue against that very point. I mentioned a minute ago this pastor in Bryan, Ohio. Here's a guy that has a beautiful ministry. It may not look like your church or the church of those who are watching, but it's a church that is necessary nonetheless. He keeps his church building open 24 hours a day so that if you need some temporary shelter, you can come and, what he says, rest and refresh in the Lord outside of the hot of the summer, inside when it's cold outside as well, to make sure that people are safe. They're off the streets and in a place of safety there as well. But the city doesn't like that. It apparently attracts people that they don't really appreciate being near their pretty town square. And so they have come after him, and I mean with a vengeance. They filed 18 criminal charges against him back in December. We worked to get those resolved and removed, only for them to file a 19th charge of criminal violations of their zoning code. And so we're having to fight a two-front war. One is in the criminal court to make sure that he doesn't go to jail or get fined, and the other is in the civil court. We filed a federal lawsuit to assert his religious liberty rights under the First Amendment and federal law. And we are right now actually on an emergency appeal in that very case because the court has sort of given approval to the bullying tactics of the mayor of Bryan, Ohio, trying to stop this important work there in her town. We're hopeful, by the way, that appeal is going to be successful. But if it's not, look, we're going to be facing the pastor receiving $1,000 a day fines for their church operating in a way that the city doesn't agree with. And the prospect, very real prospect, that Pastor Avell there in Ohio faces some criminal misdemeanor charges and a conviction thereof. That shouldn't be the case. And look, I can go on. I could talk about a pastor in New Hampshire who's just trying to use the barn on his property to plant a church, and the city doesn't want him doing that over there. Or Pastor Castro right on the border of Arizona and Mexico handing out food, and the city has put a stop to that. And people are going hungry because of that very thing. On and on I could go about the impact that things are having upon people of faith across this country.
Well, last year's or this year's Truth and Liberty Awards banquet, we recognized Coach Joe Kennedy, who I believe was one of your clients, who was fired from being a football coach in Washington because he prayed voluntarily of his own volition at the 50-yard line. Didn't force any students to join him, but that created, people started to join him voluntarily, and they didn't like that. And so there's just example after example throughout this country. So we're so thankful for what you're doing. And one of the things that I was just perusing your website before getting ready for today's show, and I saw that you have something called the 2024 Religious Liberty Index. Can you tell us what that is and what's that tool for? Would that be helpful for people to connect with that?
Yeah, especially if you're a lawmaker. Look, our think tank, which is called the Center for Religion, Culture, and Democracy, it's attached to First Liberty Institute. And they have done a thorough study of the different laws protecting religious freedom in our country and sort of the shortcomings that exist with them. And the results are actually kind of interesting, especially for me as a lawyer's perspective. For instance, the state of Illinois is in first place, which is really surprising to me, especially having litigated against Governor Pritzker and some others there in Illinois during COVID. They may have great laws on the books and it looks really good, but it seems like they may not follow them all the time. Number 50 in the country was West Virginia, my old home. And I know the people of West Virginia. They're very good people there, but their laws are apparently lagging behind when it comes to religious liberty. And so really what the index attempts to do is to simply say, here's what the laws are. And if you want to move up in the rankings, then here's some suggestions that we would have you take. Some laws that you could repeal, some laws you could add. But all of those things would be with the purpose of saying, how can we as a country, 50 individual states, really garner together in the 50 different, what one person called the labs of democracy, these state legislatures. How can we fully protect and carry out that vision that the founders had of a robust protection of religious liberty, not just in the Constitution, not just in federal law, but also with. So I would encourage folks, again, to go to firstliberty.org and look at our Religious Freedom Index there.
Yeah, it's a great resource. Well, there's some great stuff going on in the state laboratories, if you use that metaphor, on the subject of religious liberty. And I wanted to highlight some of those things with you and get your perspective. It made the news recently when Louisiana required the posting of the Ten Commandments in school classrooms. Now, the average person is probably going to think, wait a second, I thought that was held unconstitutional. What's going on there? Is that law, is that going to stand up in the courts? Are we seeing a revival here of, posting the Ten Commandments in public places?
Well, we sure hope so. And if it's not, it'll be awfully interesting to see how the Supreme Court decides that the posting of the Ten Commandments in a classroom is unconstitutional from the bench where they sit, looking at a copy of the Ten Commandments directly across from them in the frieze inside of the Supreme Court room, and then they go outside and see it again on the outside. And so if it's good for the justices, it ought to be good for our students all across the country. But clearly in the last 30 or almost 40 years now, I guess it is actually 40 years since 1980, when that decision was invalidating the posting of the Ten Commandments, a lot has changed. And a lot has changed because of coaches or people like Coach Joe Kennedy. And the decision that came out in his case that sort of put an arrow through the heart of a case that came out in 1979 called Lemon versus Kurtzman that prevented this type of thing from happening. Now, the court has shown in recent years a renewed understanding of what the First Amendment actually means. It does not require that religion go be set on the sidelines, kept out of the public square or even in our classrooms. It means that things that are important, like the Ten Commandments and the foundation that it provides to our Judeo-Christian understanding of the law in this country, are important for us to be able to recognize. And so I'm sort of hopeful for the litigation. And I know that sounds a little weird that a lawyer is excited about someone suing the state of Louisiana, but I'm hopeful in the sense that we can have an opportunity to defend that law and make some good law that would allow our students to look upon the Decalogue and understand its important role in developing not only American history, but Western thought as well.
Well, I agree with you 100%. Oklahoma, I think it was the superintendent of education there, recently required that there be instruction on the Ten Commandments as well as just Bible, the influence of the Bible. Now, I think his rule requires it be taught from a historical perspective, a cultural perspective, not necessarily theological instruction. But if that stands up as well, that's a positive development. Do you agree with that?
Our schools have been increasingly labs of social workers, it seems like. And right now, I would just be happy to get back to neutrality, right? Where that Christianity or religion in general is part of a conversation, along with all the other things that are supposedly great for our society and have been covered on the nightly news for the last 4 years especially. But of course, it's going to take some effort to get that way. So efforts by the governor and attorney general of Oklahoma are welcome to say, hey, or I guess the director of education in Oklahoma, I'm glad that they're saying, hey, this is the voice that should be heard as well. Neutrality should never mean that, all the secular voices are allowed to have their input onto things, but all the religious ones, in the name of neutrality, we can't have you. That's a forced secularism. That is a forced religious perspective that says, religion writ large is not welcome in this conversation. That's completely contrary to what our First Amendment means. In fact, it actually may be affirming what the First Amendment in the Establishment Clause was meant to prevent against, the forced understanding of religion, that you shall worship this thing that the government tells you may worship or not. That's obviously not what is meant by the First Amendment, to exclude religion. It was meant to provide a robust public square for religion to come into. And yet we have for so long abandoned that to the ideas of secular neutrality that we kind of get scared now when religion walks back into the schoolroom. We shouldn't be scared of that whatsoever. It's certainly part of our American experience and should be.
Well, I think the Supreme Court, now you correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you guys were involved in the Bladensburg War Memorial case and also the Coach Kennedy case. But in both those cases, the Supreme Court said, we're going to start looking at the Establishment Clause cases from a historical perspective. How have these things been treated in American culture and society for the last 250 years? And that's going to inform our understanding of the First Amendment. And if I'm right on that, Jeremy, doesn't that bode well for for the Ten Commandments in classrooms and prayer in schools, because until the 1960s, that was a regular component of our public school classrooms.
You know, I had my son recently go through a course where they're talking about America's religious heritage and history. And the lesson he came home with the most, he said, was that as a 19-year-old, almost 19-year-old kid, he was embarrassed by how little he knew about the Bible in comparison to how the kids from the founding era knew the Bible that as well in the first grade. So if the New England Primer and others were going so well through those religious principles that have shaped our nation, well, certainly we can put up a Ten Commandments sign somewhere inside of a public school classroom and be just fine. Yeah, we've gotten a long ways away from those important days of our founding where religion was part of the natural conversation and a welcome one. And so I think when we go back through history, yeah, you're right, that Bladensburg was one of our cases, and that importance of demonstrating religion by means of a memorial that moms put up to remember their kids in the shape of a cross, that is part of who we were in 1925, and it's certainly a part of who we were before that, and it should be a part of who we are today. That's part of our history. We cannot whitewash that out of our history, and if we do, we've done so to our detriment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and there's a whole lot more that we could talk about going on in the states. Many states, from, some of them are passing their own religious freedom restoration acts to chaplaincy programs in public schools and other things like that. But do you see sort of a revival taking place in the state legislatures across America? Should we be optimistic about the future of religious liberty in our country?
Well, I see an opportunity for us to take advantage of the laws that we have, in some cases, changed or otherwise strengthened. In fact, we've launched a program here at First Liberty called the Restoring Faith in America Initiative. In other words, it's good for us to win these cases at the Supreme Court. And I'm glad that I get to be a part of a couple of those on occasion. And it's important for us to litigate these cases as we have them around the country, in New Hampshire or Arizona or Ohio. But if we win these victories and we set a new precedent, it means precious little if people like you are not taking advantage of those things. So the Restoring Faith in America Initiative, what we are trying to do there is to take advantage of those wins. And so those monuments that had been taken down in years past, whether that's the Ten Commandments or a Star of David or a cross, that some organizations have incorrectly said had to be taken down because of the First Amendment. Well, we want to put those back up. And so we'd like to go on offense and say, hey, look, if that Ten Commandments monument in your town, for instance, was taken down, or if the Star of David was removed from your courthouse square or the Capitol grounds, because of the cases like Bladensburg and some of these other cases, they can go back up. And so if you know about one of those situations, I hope you'll tell us so that we can look at that and perhaps reopen that litigation and remind the judge that the law has changed. And so if the people in that local community would like to put up that recognition of religion in their city, town, or county, well, we ought to be able to consider that and do that very thing. In other words, religious liberty is important, and it's critical we defend it within the courtrooms. But if we end it at the courthouse and don't bring it to your hometown, it means precious little. So please take advantage of the freedoms that we're winning all around the country. It'll mean a lot to us as an attorney, if nothing else.
Yeah. Well, how do people know? I mean, how can they get informed about? I think so many Americans are still operating under this sort of state of intimidation mentally. The left has done such a thorough job of making us think that it's illegal to speak about God in public or anything as bold and brash as posting the Ten Commandments. So how are people supposed to get informed of these new legal developments?
Well, I sure hope they go to firstliberty.org and learn about our cases there and sign up for our insider news that comes out, I think, once a week now on Fridays and be informed. You can listen to First Liberty Live, our podcast that we put out regularly when there's some news to report about religious freedom in the country. So those are easy ways to stay informed there as well. But, you and I as citizens have a responsibility. We've been given this freedom. The government didn't come up with that great idea. That was given to us by God. And so if this belongs to us, then we've got a responsibility to make sure that it is propagated to the next generation. What was it that Ronald Reagan said? Freedom is only one generation away from being removed. One day we could wake up and talk about the country that used to be. And I fear we might be on the edge of that very dream right now. Nightmare, I guess. But if you and I, as Ronald Reagan reminded us, freedom does not pass down through the bloodstream. We have to recommit ourselves to that every single generation. So here's my challenge to those that are listening tonight. Go home tonight, have dinner with your kids, and talk to them about religious freedom and the freedom of this country as a whole. That's how we change freedom in this country. You may someday be one of my clients, perhaps, and I'll have a good time defending you. I hope you never have to. Perhaps you'll run for office, and that's really important and good too. Maybe you'll even become a judge someday. Great. But if you really want to change this country, if you really want to make an impact for freedom in this country, it starts by sitting down and having dinner with your kids and telling them about what this country is supposed to be. That's how we change the future of America. I have been the participant in great cases of the Supreme Court of the United States, and man, I'm glad I've gotten that chance. But I got to tell you, my two sisters, raising their kids and telling them about freedom, have probably done more for the sake of freedom than my entire career combined, and I am okay with that. And I would like to have you guys outdo me as well. Go home and teach your kids about freedom, and then live like you're a free people. But we'll defend you if it doesn't work out and the government pushes back against that. Just call us. We're happy to do that. But go be confident in the freedoms that you have. We've won those important victories. Now go live like a free person.
Well, that's awesome. I think I'm going to cut that clip, Jeremy, and use that. Well, so how do people get in touch with you? Is it on the website? Can they get legal help there? Well, how do people take advantage of what you're doing?
Yeah, if you go to firstliberty.org, there's a banner up in the corner that'll say get legal help, and just fill out that form. We'll take a look at what's going on, and if we need to, we'll get in touch with you and figure out how to move forward. And of course, you can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter, or I guess it's X now, and Instagram and all the things. We've got all those things out there for you to be able to review and stay in touch and socialize everywhere. So go to firstliberty.org. That's the main hub of all the rest of the things we're doing.
Well, that's awesome. Jeremy, let me see if I can squeeze in one more thing here, and it's going to be political, but it's not. The new Republican platform adopted at the convention last week has a section on religious liberty. Unfortunately, it's in the middle of the document and not first. They put the economic stuff first. But in this, they say that Americans have the freedom to act in accordance with their beliefs, not just in places of worship, but in everyday life. And I think it's so important that they recognize that the Constitution secures not just freedom of worship, which is what the liberals, how they wanted to coin the phrase in the last 20 years, but it's freedom of free exercise of religion, meaning anywhere that our conscience and our faith dictates that we act a certain way, we as Americans have the God-given right to do that. Do you see the significance of that subtle distinction there? Is that important, or am I just imagining that?
It's a critical distinction. The founders wanted us to have the free exercise of religion and not limit ourselves to the four walls of our home, or what Justice Alito once referred to as whispers in the recesses of our own home. That's not religious freedom. I'm eager for a return to an administration, whether it is President Trump or somebody else, that will welcome a dialogue about protecting religious freedom, rather than, as it seems right now, having one after the other of attacks on religious freedom, or at least the dismissal as unimportant those matters of faith in our country. I'm looking forward to the future.
Well, unfortunately, brother, we're out of time for your part in the show today. But once again, thank you for what you do. Thanks for coming on. And please let Kelly know how much we appreciate everything you guys are doing.
Will do. Thank you.
All right. Have a good evening. All right, folks, we're going to take a short break, about a minute and a half, and we'll be right back after that with Alex McFarland, and we're going to continue our discussion on the subject of religious freedom in America.
I want to give you a special invitation to join me for our Truth and Liberty Conference on September the 12th through the 14th. I tell you, these conferences are some of the very best meetings I have ever attended in my life. And this year, we've got Dr. Ben Carson with us, Pastor Che Ahn, Bill Federer, Marjorie Dannenfelser, who's head of the pro-life organization in the United States, Rick Green, Luke Ball, Richard Harris, and myself. It's going to be a great, great time here at our facility in Woodland Park. We're going to have workshops in the afternoon and just a lot of different ways to help equip you so that you can be salt and light in this society that we live in. Join us for our Truth and Liberty Conference, September 12th through the 14th in Woodland Park, Colorado.
Hey everybody, this is Richard Harris, Executive Director of Truth and Liberty. Recently we had our second annual awards banquet. I'm telling you, it was an awesome event. And this year we had many corporate and individual sponsors. Andrew Womack and I want to say thank you personally to each and every one of you who sponsored the event. We want to acknowledge your support. You know, our sponsors make it possible for us here at Truth and Liberty to educate, unify, and mobilize believers in Jesus Christ to affect the reformation of nations through the 7 mountains of cultural influence. And so to all of you, we just want you to know that your generous support helps us not only to proclaim the truth through our Truth and Liberty show, but also to continue offering biblical resources on our website, like the Pastor's Toolkit for Cultural Engagement. Also presenting powerful conferences every year where we're able to equip believers to be light and salt in their communities, and so much more. So God bless you. Thank you again for supporting Truth and Liberty. All right, folks, we're back here on the Truth and Liberty Show. I hope you enjoyed our first segment with Jeremy Dys, Senior Counsel at First Liberty Institute. What a great lawyer, what a great work they're doing there. But I'm also excited to bring in our good friend and board member of Truth and Liberty, apologist, evangelist, and culture warrior, Alex McFarland. Alex, thanks for coming on with me today. So good to see you again.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Richard. As you know, we love Truth and Liberty.
Yeah, and we love Alex McFarland and Angie and everybody there. So you're in the middle of something, you're in a summer camp or something like that. What are you guys doing right now?
Well, I greet you, Richard, from the mountains of South Carolina. We are in our 6th of 7 summer biblical worldview camp. We've been in Montana, we've been in Indiana, and just moments ago, Richard, we had another teenage camper accept Christ. We've had about 115 teenagers pray to get saved this summer. And Richard, we're teaching biblical worldview. Amen. And I will say, here in South Carolina, it's been pouring down rain, so we've been indoors doing more and more courses, not only the gospel, how to study your Bible, but we've been talking about America and the Constitution. And these middle school and high schoolers, they love it. They're just eating it up. So I'm in the office of the Awanata Valley Christian Camp. They're letting me use the office to do an interview.
That's awesome. I think I see some bug spray on the shelf behind. No, that's great. Well, I kind of wish I was with you. That sounds like a lot of fun. But, well, Alex, I just wanted to take some time with you on the show here to talk about the subject of religious liberty, religious freedom, and how important it is. It's kind of foundational to all of our freedom, to our entire system of government and concept of government. Can you comment on this? Why did our founding fathers put, so you've got the First Amendment, and it's the first of the Bill of Rights, but inside the First Amendment there's 5 rights, and the first of the 5 is religion, freedom of religion. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So why did the founders put religious freedom the first of the first of the first?
Great question, Richard. Well, obviously, where you stand with God is the most important of life's questions. And, you know, Thomas Jefferson, the writer of the Declaration and one of our most significant founding fathers, but Thomas Jefferson said the worst tyranny would be the tyrant or the despot that tries to impinge on someone's conscience. And so freedom of religion, freedom of religious expression, freedom of viewpoint expression, freedom of speech. This was just paramount to the founders because they knew what it was to be persecuted, discriminated against, whether it be by force or even intimidation. They knew what it was to be silenced, and they didn't want that in a free America. They believed that our natural rights, which come from God, and as JFK said in his inauguration in January of '61, the rights do not come from government. Far from it. The role of government is to guard the rights that you've already gotten from your Creator God, and the first most foundational, freedom of conscience and freedom of speech. And so, Richard, to your question, that's why this was so paramount to the founders. And they also believed really that the preservation of liberty depended on the free expression of ideas. And, we're living in a time where really social justice, so-called political correctness, there are certain ideas that have to be suppressed if the pluralistic CRT worldview is to be supreme. But the founders, they wouldn't have seen it that way. They believed that the preservation of liberty and a constitutional republic depended on the free exchange and free expression of ideas.
Absolutely. Well, our national birth certificate, the Declaration of Independence, people don't realize that it's really creates the idea, the foundation of ideas that support the Constitution. The Constitution is not really an idea type document, it's a functional document, but the Declaration has the principles, and it says that all of our rights come from God and that not from government. And if we don't have freedom of religion in America, are we in danger of forgetting that basic principle?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you talk about that the Declaration is our national birth certificate. I want to challenge people to read the Declaration, the preamble, the Constitution, the 27-point Bill of Rights. They really need to be taken as a cohesive whole, I believe. And Richard, I really cringe a lot on the left in the media. They're saying there's some talking points that are being reiterated as if to ingrain them in the public psyche. And you'll hear those on the left say, well, America is an idea. Well, it's a whole lot more than that. I mean, it's a constitutional system of government. Now, we're not following it consistently, but we're hammered with the idea that democracy is under attack. It is not, for a number of reasons, one of which is that we're not a democracy. In fact, the founders leaned heavily on Plato and Aristotle, and a lot of the ideas they drew were from the great thinkers of Greece and Rome and Christendom and European law. And by the time of the founders in 1776, I mean, they knew that democracy, which they had seen like in France, that was mob rule, they did not want that. We're a Judeo-Christian representative republic that is much more than an idea. Although, I think about the poem by Emma Lazarus that's being held by the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. I get the desire for freedom is in every human heart to one degree or another. But in America alone, Richard, there is the mechanism by which liberty, the greatest liberty for the greatest number of people for the most sustainable duration of time, now 248 years, could be guaranteed. So one of the reasons I just applaud you and what you're doing with Truth and Liberty and what Andrew envisioned with the School of Practical Government is that we can help generations of students understand that America is not just this amorphous idea, but it is a sustainable system of government. Richard, in my opinion, the best form of government, this short of Christ's return and heaven on earth, the American constitutional system is the best form of government that the human race has yet seen.
Well, there's no question about that in my mind, and that's what the freedom to worship God, the freedom to actually exercise our faith, is what the founders said. They didn't say freedom of worship; they said the free exercise thereof. That means the freedom to live out the dictates of our faith and our conscience, not just inside the church, but outside the church. This is where, we're living in days, Alex, I think you'd agree with this, that when we were young, we just took for granted religious freedom and didn't realize we would ever experience a time where people are actually trying to tell us we can't do what we believe, or we have to do something that violates what we believe, like two men marrying one another and us having to sanction that and approve it and stuff like that. And so that free exercise of religion is just the foundation of this nation. And you know, I was in our first segment, our guest was Jeremy Dys, and I didn't ask him this question, but he kind of hinted at it. But it seems like all the tyrannies of the past throughout the ages, one of their targets is always the elimination of religious freedom first, because they don't want people answering to a power that is higher than them, because that means that they are not in total control. So they either secularize and say you can't practice religion at all, like the Marxists and the communists, or they say I am God's representative and you have to believe what I say, like Ayatollah in Iran or King Henry in England or whatever. And am I kind of pretty accurate in my understanding of history here? Is religion really important for freedom from that perspective too?
Oh, absolutely. Well said. Just like James Madison had said that our Constitution is made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. But the larger context of that quote was this. He says, human government has no power to restrain unbridled human passions. Yep. He said, without a foundation of morality and religion, lawlessness would reign as easily as a whale goes through a net. So here's the thing, folks. Here's a word, by the way, the word magisteria, right? From the word for king or magi, right? Well, there is we talk about the hills of influence. In the home, it's the husband, wife, the mother and father. In the church, it's obviously God, but it's also clergy operating within the bounds of God's word. Yes, there is a magisteria government. In education, the founders understood, and there was a great scholar named Alvin Plantinga. He wrote a book several years ago, Richard, called The Twin Pillars of Christian Scholarship, Faith and Reason. Well, learning depends on reason and logic, but also truth. Those are the magisteria that rule the mind, truth. And obviously, we know the Holy Spirit of God. But here's my point, Richard. The despots, the tyrants, the governments that people are not free under, they cannot allow for free religious proclamation. Because when you read the Word of God, you learn eternal truth. And when Spirit-filled ministers proclaim God's word, as Jefferson said, it's revelation that sets people free. Now, there are a couple of ways to look at law. There is what's called natural law and constitutional law, and then there's case law or progressive law. Richard, one of the things that really concerns me as I travel the country, I've had people say to me, they'll say, well, gay marriage is okay because we made it law in 2015. Well, case law is not the philosophical judicial foundation of America. Something is not right merely because we put ink on paper. As Dr. King said in 1963, a human law is a just or valid law to the degree that it comports with God's eternal righteous law that flows from his nature. So, Richard, I think religious expression is a necessary corrective, or at least to hold government in check. And we have to be free to preach and proclaim, to remind people of what our nation is and to warn people of what our nation should not be.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's awesome. You know, the founding fathers believed in natural law, like you're saying. It's even in the Declaration of Independence where they say that, when a government becomes destructive of the end of preserving liberty, then it's the right of the people to alter and abolish it, and to assume among the stations of the earth that position that they're entitled to by the laws of God, the laws of nature and nature's God. So we see the law of nature right there in the founding document. But radical progressives, well, they don't even have to be so radical today. Just progressivism in general wants secularization of every institution of society. It's not just government, folks. I mean, tell me, Alex, you stop me and correct me if I'm wrong. But they want total secularization. And if we do that, then where's our mooring? Where's our foundation? Where's our accountability? How will the people of the country know where their rights come from if we go that direction?
Well, these are wonderful questions. Listen, if we don't have God and moral truth that we all agree on, that we know, as the founders would so frequently say, the laws of nature and nature's God, the God of creation, the God that wrote his law on our heart, Romans 1 and 2 talks about. Well, if we don't look to God for our source of truth, then we'll look to the other magisteria, meaning government. And Richard, I believe that is exactly what people want. Yeah. I mean, the leaders that are the leftists, the globalists. And let me just parenthetically insert this. If you don't have the true and living God as your ultimate good, you'll try to create an ultimate thing. Mm-hmm. I want to say to everybody watching, there will be a God in your life. It's inescapable. The question is it the true and living God? Is it the Lord Jesus and his word, or whatever? And just like in the book of Genesis, when they tried to make a Tower of Babel, look, a modern United Nations globalist human utopia, which would not be utopia at all, it would be a dystopia. But that is the God. For those that do not know the true and living God or his word, they're trying to build a God of their own. And I'm going to say this. I was at the Republican convention all last week. Donald Trump said this a number of times. He said regarding the globalist, Marxist, secular left, he said, look, they're after me because they're after you. It's just me that stands in their way. Now, regardless of what you think of Trump, just like Churchill in World War II, just like Reagan in the 80s, there need to be some voices that say, look, time out. You can believe what you want to believe. If you're an atheist, that's your prerogative. But what we cannot let you do is tear down the foundation that gives us all the level playing field. Richard, let me throw out a word here, the word pluralistic. Very often I'll hear people on the left say, we are a pluralistic society. Well, yes, in the sense you can believe whatever you want to believe. I'm a Christian. Somebody else is not a Christian. Nobody is going to coerce you or force you to try to be a Christian. But what we really can't let the left do is tear down the foundation, the backdrop that lets citizens walk around freely, prosperously, safely, whether they're a Christian or not. We are pluralistic in the sense of personal conscience, but we are not pluralistic in the sense of lawlessness.
Right.
We are a nation based on the Ten Commandments, which also happens to be a mirror image of the law of God written on every heart. We have the rule of law. We should have equal justice before the law, equal accountability before the law. But Richard, I think a lot of the chaos, the unrest, the instability that many people can't seem to put their finger on, the source of it is our drift from, and now in some quarters, suppression of objective morality, which the loss of which jeopardizes our whole constitutional republic.
Well, I couldn't agree more with that, Alex. I think that there's a logical logical sequence that leads up to what we see in leftism today, and it begins with the rejection of God as the authority. And if you reject the existence of God, or you reject the idea that God's truth is knowable in some way, you just put him out there as some ethereal force or whatever, then there's nothing to base your reasoning on anymore. There's no authority. And that's where moral relativism creeps in, which says, well, you can have your truth and I can have my truth. No one knows what truth is. Truth doesn't exist. So, and all that is a charade for I get to do what I want, really. And when you end up there, then where's the security for freedom? Where are the boundaries for what's right? Whatever the person in power believes is right is what is right. And then those who are in a minority are in danger of being made into slaves. And that's no way to run a free country.
No. And, with the advent, the attempted mainstreaming of like transgenderism,
yeah.
For the first time, there is not only suppression of free speech,
right.
but even the enforced compelled speech.
Yeah.
Right now in Michigan and in other states, there are on the docket suggested laws to prosecute people that don't recognize, either ignorantly or intentionally, don't recognize somebody's gender identification. So let's say you see a man that is clearly a male, but he, quote, identifies as female, and you misgender him, you could be prosecuted. Well, that compelled speech that we must be forcibly made to acknowledge what we know is not reality, we've never had that. So let me just say, folks, there's this old statement, nature abhors a vacuum. What's been so beautiful about our Judeo-Christian constitutional republic, over the years, there have been a number of forces that would conspire to jeopardize our freedom, whether it be tyranny or Marxism or communism, or in recent years, Sharia law. Richard, it's like this. There are two iron fists arm wrestling for the future of the West. One is the iron fist of communism. One is the iron sword of Sharia. And one force alone has been sufficient to hold both of these juggernauts at bay. And it's a Judeo-Christian republic. And to everybody watching, I'm going to say, I wish you were a Christian. I'm a born-again believer. Viewers, I urge you, put your faith in Christ, who gave his life for you. But even if you're not a Christian, you would have a vested interest in the Christian presence in our culture, because the Christian presence is what gave the world the U.S. Constitution, and the U.S. Constitution is what holds at bay two things that would steamroll across the continent, as they have tried to do: socialism, Marxism, communism, and Sharia law. Under either of those, nobody is free.
That is so good and so true. Well, Alex, we've only got 3 minutes left. I wish I had an hour with you. But you were at the Republican National Convention. A new platform was adopted there. I wanted to ask you if you'd had a chance to read it. I'm slightly disappointed in the abortion piece, but the rest of it, there's a lot of good in it, including the part on religious freedom, where it expressly recognizes that it's not just freedom of worship, but freedom to exercise our faith in every part and aspect of life. That's a direct pushback against the radical LGBT progressive agenda, which is awesome. What do you think? What did you take away from the convention? What do you think of the new platform?
I understand what they're doing, yes, and I'm an unabashed pro-life supporter. Let me just say, and I talked to many delegates. I talked to Eric Trump at length. I talked to Laura Trump. I talked to Mayor Giuliani briefly. Mike Lindell, the My Pillow celebrity. Look, here's the thing. The Republican Party has not abandoned the position of life. And in fact, Richard J.D. Vance, I read his webpage in its entirety, and I quote, J.D. Vance said, "I am 100% pro-life." but they're not leading with that. I really think it's strategic. That they're talking about securing the border, they're talking about the economy, they're talking about our constitutional freedoms. But from everybody I talked to, from, like I say, from Eric Trump on down, I think that the support for the sanctity of human life is still there. We really need to pray. Richard, it felt like a revival meeting. On every lobby, mezzanine, there were prayer huddles. It was a thrilling week. And of course, you and I haven't even spoken about the miracle of how I truly believe Donald Trump's life was miraculously spared by God by millimeters. Folks, I beg of you, pray for this election, be informed, influence others, and vote.
Amen. I agree 100% that God saved Donald Trump. But, God will do his part, but we've got to do our part. And our part is to vote according to biblical values. And if you look at where Donald Trump stands on the issues and what he and J.D. Vance hope to accomplish compared to the radical, secular, Marxist, demonic agenda of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, there is no comparison. And we are, every single believer is duty bound to cast a vote in one direction in this race, and that is, to me, beyond debate. But anyway, Alex, it's so awesome having you on the show again. Can't wait to see you again in person. And real quick, what's your website, brother, and how can people take advantage of your many books and other ministry?
Just my name, alexmcfarland.com. And folks, I wrote a lot of content for first-time voters. alexmcfarland.com/vote. alexmcfarland.com/vote. Please check it out.
All right, we're out of time. Thanks, brother. Enjoy the rest of your camp. God bless all of you for watching. We'll see you next time on Truth and Liberty.
Thank you for joining today's Truth and Liberty livecast. You can watch today's and past livecasts in our archives at truthandliberty.net. Our goal is to educate Christians and connect them with resources and organizations to help them impact their sphere of influence. You can help us accomplish this by making a donation at truthandliberty.net/donate. Join us next time for more Truth and Liberty.